Hello, and this is the webinar for Differentiated Instruction through Project-Based Learning by John McCarthy. Just a little bit about myself. I have 20 plus years of education experience, and I have taught in 3 different states, as well as been a consultant coach across the country. And I facilitate a writers group called the Deadwood Writers in Southeast Michigan. So as we look at differentiated instruction and project-based learning, we wanted to think about the question, how do I differentiate effectively in a PBL unit so that all students succeed academically and with 21st century skills? Or another way of putting it, how do we do what's best for learning? And this is an important question to explore because often when we are doing lessons, some of our colleagues may say that we are covering curriculum, or I taught that. And we all know that unless the students have learned it, then we need to find other instructional approaches to get there. And within project-based learning, which is a natural format for differentiated instruction, this really gives us the opportunity to explore that question. So as we move forward, just know that at the end of this recording that you can go to the Edmodo site for project-based learning and post questions that you have from this session, and I will answer those. So as we look at the whole approach, there's a foundation of which differentiated instruction is based on. DI is something that has come from both gifted and special education, and these are some important books that really set the foundation for understanding for the later books that have come out that are really good resources looking at differentiated instruction and looking at project-based learning. Some particular ones, Fulfilling the Promise of the Differentiated Classroom, is a great book to understand the pedagogy of how we differentiate within our instructional practices, as well as it's got a nice appendices of good strategies. And we have differentiation in practice. You'll see the green book for which is for the high school. There is also one for the middle school and elementary, in which there are unit designs in which it includes differentiated instructional strategies and teacher annotated comments about how they differentiate it. Rick Ramelli's book, Fair Isn't Always Equal, is an excellent book for looking at the challenges around grading assessment, as well as how we look at differentiating within that context in a way that's fair and best for all students for learning. Stirring the Head, Heart, and Soul by Lynn Erickson is a great book to look at concepts that can create the big idea, and from the big idea we can develop really effective driving questions, and also we can help students design their own driving questions or guiding questions for the units that they explore. And Leadership for Differentiating School and Classroom by Susan Allen and Carolyn Thomason is an excellent book. Susan Allen is one of the pioneers for leadership in terms of doing differentiation as a systemic approach, and this is a great toolkit to explore as you think about project-based learning as a systemic implementation with differentiated instruction. So as we look at this, we need to keep in mind that the foundations of differentiated instruction is about what we see on the left, content, process, and product, and what's on the right, readiness, interest, and learning profiles. Content, process, and product is how teachers design their units and their lessons. We have to think about the standards and the content that students need to know, understand, be able to do. We have to explore how we're going to have students get the opportunity to process their thinking, to digest what they understand. And then the products are essential for telling us what students understand and what they don't understand. And so as we look at this, the way students enter into this relationship of learning is through their readiness, interests, and learning profiles. Readiness is about the level of skill they bring to the table when they come to the unit or come to the grade level. Interest is how they connect. When they ask the question, why is this important to know? How is this going to help me when I leave your classroom today? When I finish the unit at the end, how can I use the learning in a manner that is meaningful and effective? And learning profiles, which is a combination of multiple intelligence and thinking styles and learning styles, is also something we consider as we structure the learning within the project-based learning unit. And so we bring those together in two rails by having students and teachers be focused on both sides of the tracks and merge them together, which is what project-based learning does as a structural approach. So as we look at project-based learning and differentiated instruction, we're going to look at from the perspective of the 8 essential elements of project-based learning. And just know there are a variety of strategies that can be utilized, and we can differentiate just about any strategy in an effective, reflective manner to help support learners. And this list here you'll see there's a website where you can actually delve deeper into what a group of teachers came together with in designing what they felt was effective strategies. So let's start with significant content. When we look at that, we're thinking about readiness and what skill levels students bring to the table to make connections. And that's why we have to think in terms of how we scaffold the content and skills, how we set up experiences for the kids, especially when they don't succeed with the learning the first or second time. It's what I call those crossroad lessons. You know what those are. Those are the ones when you look ahead right now and you think about the difficult concepts that you are going to be teaching and that you know that kids struggle, then those are crossroad lessons that we need to prepare and differentiate. A helpful tool for this is a project teaching and learning guide. And so within project-based learning, what we do, in this case you see this is about the missions project in California. On the left-hand column are the products that the students have to develop, a proposal to the Archbishop, as well as the product of building a California mission model. Now, in order to do this, the students need to demonstrate their understanding of the key standards, which are broken down in the second column, as we see a list of a variety of skills and concepts that the students need to develop an understanding with in order to utilize. And then in the right-hand column is where we list the types of lessons and experiences that we're going to provide for students so that it helps them learn those key concepts. It is in this third column that we want to take the time and think about what are some of the strategies that we need to plan for to support students. So for example, in the first row, History of Spanish Rule in California, lectures, videos, and textbooks are the tools of choice for this teacher. If we know that some students struggle with collecting information or listening to information, perhaps we're going to use a graphic organizer for the students to fill in. And for some graphic organizers, they might be partially filled in for some students so that it helps them simply highlight the key points and then add a few more details. For others, we might leave it blank, and for a few others, we might give them the entire thing filled and have them again highlight the key points. In the Native people in North California, online research and worksheets is the tools of choice. And again, here, as they're doing research, perhaps what's going to happen is that they might look at some videos that are well researched and of high quality in terms of the content, so that students who are visual in terms of taking things in or helps them take things in more effectively can do that along with the traditional research approach of looking through documents. So the Teaching and Learning Guide is an essential tool and for project-based learning and for us to be considering how we're going to support students in their learning process. 21st century skills is a critical component for our project-based learning and by its nature is a great support for students to build on their learning. And what's also good about this piece is that it reminds us that differentiated instruction is for all students, from the students who really struggle to the students who we might say are typical students and our students who are advanced or even gifted. We want to stretch them all so they can learn and grow. And as we do that, it's really important to have a variety of sources of evidence for any given area. both for 21st century skills as well as for the academic skills. So as we can see, for example, in the top row, that there are writing activities, performance activities, and opportunities even to talk it through. And we want to be very clear about what are the clear criteria that students have to demonstrate so that there's not a conflict. So for example, if the focus is understanding the content, say in science, then we might have students do an oral conversation about what they understand because we're not assessing for writing. And so it's very important to have those multiple sources as we look through this. It's also important to consider that with assessment, there are times, for example, that the way we set up our assessment could be a block or hindrance to students' explanation of what they understand. So taking the same example of a written test, what some teachers will do is they'll give that written test, and then any student who doesn't get a certain level score, perhaps it's somewhere between 75 and 80%, then anyone who scores less than that must take a alternative assessment, which might be an oral interview, or it might be some other type of assessment, just to give them a different way to show their understanding. Because if I do the written one, which they all should have the experience with, but I have some students who are not strong writers and have difficulty articulating what they understand, by giving them other alternatives, it enables them to really show what they know. And from just my own personal observations with students and the dialogue with my colleagues, this has proven true time and time again. And that's why it's also important, as we look at 21st century skills in particular, that we need to give students the opportunity to self-assess themselves as well as their peer group, along with the feedback that we give. And formative assessment is really critical through all aspects of the 8 elements, that we should actually be assessing on a daily basis in a formative way to understand what kids know and don't know. Now this might sound crazy to some to say, wait, I can't report that into a grade book every day. That's just too much paperwork, and I would agree with that. It's more that we do this in an informal manner to collect data to track trends, so that if after 2 days and sometimes 3 days, if there's 20 or 30% of the students who still aren't getting the concept or skills, that's a trend. We need to address that before it gets too far ahead in the weeks that we then have to mediate student perceptions about the work. In-depth inquiry is a critical component of sound learning, and it's an important part of project-based learning. And so we want to look at different ways for students to really delve deeply into the content and explore their understanding, as well as make new understanding. A great strategy for that are rafts, which is where we give students a role and we give them an audience who they're going to communicate to. We give them a format. Sometimes it's written, sometimes it's performed or talked, or it might be some other type of format that students may use. And then we give them a topic for which they have to answer the raft question around the key concepts. That topic should have a call to action. Now, when differentiated, there are more than one choice. As you see here, there are 4 choices. To take it further, we could even take the format and leave that blank and just tell the students, you decide what is the best format. And that allows them the interest and learning profile approach to really think about what is their best mode of communicating what they understand. And so there's a variety of ways we can do this. What's key here, again, is that we have clear criteria about what is expected. What are the key concepts and skills that must be reflected in the products of the students. Sometimes you hear someone express concern about doing a collage or doing a video or doing a role play that by its inherent structure would lack the content. This is not the case if we have clear criteria and we've made it very clear and we've coached with our students to understand what they have to show in those modems. so that way when they put together their final products or presentations, they have to be able to make those connections. And also with driving questions, which we know is the important component of project-based learning, as in BIE we talk about that it is the thesis statement of the article, or in this case the primary focus that needs to be answered by the end of the project. There's a variety of things we should explore. First of all, by having an authentic audience beyond the classroom can help kids see the relevance of what they're doing to the world that's compose their lives when they leave school. When they can make those connections, it makes the concepts more easily understood. Also, we can have the students develop driving questions or guiding questions themselves based upon an overarching idea or concept that you've given. Perhaps you give them the major driving question, they take that and they modify it based upon their independent exploration or research that they're going to be doing as a team. You can also take graphs, and you can turn graphs into driving questions that are student generated. So there's a variety of ways that we can really think through this and provide students opportunities to make the connections that they need. Need to know is a critical component of project-based learning, and it demonstrates differentiation when we think in terms of interest. How do we connect kids so they find the meaning? And one of the common things that we do in project-based learning is we design an entry event. And so there's a variety of different options that we can do for that. You know, in this case, you see we could do a field trip, we can bring someone in or Skype someone in to have a conversation with the students to create that call to action, to help students connect the audience beyond the classroom. Voice and choice is a critical component to project-based learning, as well as it is for differentiation. And choice, as we've seen in some previous examples such as the RAF, the teacher constructs the options that students choose from. But we also want to take it further. We want to try to establish an opportunity for student voice, as we saw in 21st Century Skills when the students would give feedback about themselves and their team's performance. We can also look at an example as in Sternberg's Triarchic theory of multiple intelligence. Many are familiar with Gardner's multiple intelligence and perhaps use it in your work. Sternberg talks about three primary multiple intelligence that we all have the capacity to do well in. That is analytical, which is the abstract thinker, a typical way that instruction is taught in school. Practical thinkers are those who say, show me how this relates to my life. Show me how what we're learning connects and makes sense. And the creative thinker is the innovator, someone who sees things from different perspectives. And if we all have the capacity for all three, one of the primary ways that Sternberg's multiple intelligence is used is in the product development, where a teacher might give students three different forms of what the products might look like based upon these multiple intelligence, and then the students decide which approach they want to go with. And as we explore that, we can just find that there are a variety of things that students can do as they choose those options. And below you'll see there are two articles from Ed Leadership that you can actually look up. You can Google it or go to ASCD. They are currently freely available for review. What does it mean to be smart and excellence for all? There are some others as well, but these are good starting points to explore Sternberg's approach to thinking, which has been researched and been supported. Another example is the Freire model. Now this is a modification of my own from the original or traditional approach to the Freire model. In the traditional one, the bottom two squares would ask to give an example and a non-example. My point here is that we can always adjust it and think in terms of thinking styles so students can process and look at concepts in different ways. Because sometimes when we can look at a concept in different ways, it helps us find the connecting point for us. With revision and reflections, I find that this is one of the examples where we have many pure experiences of differentiated instruction. And we see that through the critique protocols and writer's workshop, reading circles, and reading apprenticeship. The challenge here is, as effective as these models are for helping students learn, there is a concern among some of our colleagues of the time it takes to set it up. And I have to tell you from experience and from the experience of others who have gone this path, that while it does take time to set up, in the long term it actually saves you time. Because if you think about it, as soon as students take ownership of their thinking process and giving each other feedback, it frees the teacher to go and support the students who need support in different ways, as opposed to trying to hit all the needs, simultaneously as a whole class. That's what I call, we want to avoid being chained to the front of the desk. So when we think about public audience, the key thing here is that if we have clear criteria, we can allow student voice in how they present their learning, how they communicate that. And that's really important for differentiating for their needs, whether it's for readiness, interest, or learning profile. So it's also important to reiterate how necessary it is to do ongoing formative assessments. The summative are your milestones, your benchmarks along the way when you're trying to assess, have they accomplished what they need to accomplish. Formative checks, or what I call health checks, are opportunities to track their progress before the summative assessment, to know where they are in their learning understanding, so if intervention is needed, it can be done prior to those summative assessments. Need to know activity is a great tool for this, because at the beginning of a project we find out from students what they know and what they need to know, and we come back and we should be revisiting this at least a weekly basis, if not sometimes more often. And the key here is that when students give feedback, they let the teacher know, if by consensus, if they understand any of the concepts or skills that are listed on the needs to knows. If one student says they still are struggling, then we can't cross out that concept. We need to figure out how we need to revisit it, whether it's individually, small groups, through jigsaws, or as a whole class to help mediate those needs. So need to know is a great tool to come back repeatedly and look at those needs, and therefore identify what's important. And it gives student voice to feel that they have ownership. For example, you might use thumbs up, thumbs to the side, and thumbs down. Thumbs up means I got it, I understand it. Thumbs to the side means, you know what, I'm doing pretty good. I might need a little bit more, but I'm okay to move forward. And thumbs down is I need help. And that's a quick way to kind of see where students are at and then to proceed from there. But there is the elephant in the room, and that is about grading. How do we grade? Do we differentiate the levels of the work that we're going to grade, or do we differentiate the ways we come at the assessment? What's important here is that differential instruction within project-based learning is a journey that students are taking, that by the end of that journey, at the end of the project, we want all students to be in a place where they can be successful and really understand the concepts and be able to articulate and utilize those concepts. So as we differentiate along the way, we're going to remove scaffolds as we get closer to the end, because the students will no longer need them. So we'll do that type of differentiation. But as far as the final assessment, that's going to be based on the same standards for all students, because that's what we're working towards. So we don't differentiate the quality of the assessments, but we might differentiate the different approaches to assessments. If you recall in an earlier conversation, I talked about the idea of the example where students might have done an essay or a written exam, and then based upon the scores, some students had the opportunity to do a retest using a different format. That's one way of doing that. You could also give students different choices of format. You just want to make sure that based upon the criteria and the standards that you're assessing, that whatever option they choose is going to get the same quality outcome. So as we think about teaming is another great place to do differentiation. You have your project teams, and you have what I call your study teams. And what that means is that in the course of the project, the kids are in teams that they have to work together towards the end product that they're going to design in order to answer the driving question. But there are times during a unit you may regroup the kids based upon their needs for certain skills and concepts. And those would become learning teams, which would be short-term teams. They would work on certain areas, or you might work in mini workshops with groups of kids to provide that support. It's also an opportunity to do jigsawing. But when you do these things, especially when you form your primary project teams, it's good to collect data about the students to find out from them what they know about themselves. So in this case, you'll see that students are assessing themselves low, medium, or high in certain skills, and then there's annotated comments at the bottom by the teacher. And so when the teacher collects these, it's for their use only, so they can make changes, but the initial reports are student perceptions of themselves, and that's important to know, especially if they see themselves as not being successful in your subject area. Then you know that's a psychological piece that you need to mediate to build their sense of success. And this allows us to group teams thoughtfully so that every member of the team has a cognitive role responsibility. So through learning profile, we identify what are their strengths, what do they bring to the table, so as we form the groups and form the task, every student has a way to contribute in a meaningful way, as opposed to the past where the kids who are more successful felt like they might have to do all the work, and the kids who are least successful might felt like they had nothing to contribute and therefore didn't. By being very thoughtful about what they bring to the table, it becomes a win-win situation where they're all supporting each other. So here are a variety of resources. The very first one, the Learning Classrooms, is a site that provides lots of links and resources around differentiated instruction, which can be combined with your practices within the project-based learning unit framework. Also know that on Edmodo for BIE, you can go and post your questions and also read the archive of questions that other people have posted and the answers that they've received. So think about those questions you may have and feel free to post them on Edmodo. This was John McCarthy for differentiated instruction through project-based learning. Thank you for participating.